Imagine standing before a medieval castle, its drawbridge raised high, and its iron portcullis lowered like clenched teeth. What incredible secrets lie hidden beyond these ancient barriers? These entrances were never just simple doorways or grand arches welcoming visitors inside. They were masterpieces of engineering and psychological cunning, designed not only to protect but to deceive, intimidate, and control everyone who approached. For centuries, castle gates have captured our imagination in stories and films, but the real truth is even more fascinating than fiction. What if I told you that these stone and iron giants were hiding layers of secret tunnels, clever traps, and hidden mechanisms, all meant to outsmart enemies and ensure survival in a world where every visitor could be a threat? Today, we're going to journey together into the heart of these medieval fortifications to uncover what castle entrances truly protected and concealed. We'll explore how something as seemingly straightforward as a gate could be a multi-layered death trap, a symbol of power, and even an escape route all at once. From murder holes that rained destruction from above to drawbridges that could collapse under an army's weight, every element served a purpose, and it wasn't just about physical strength. These designs played with the minds of those who approached, using fear, confusion, and awe to weaken their resolve before a single arrow was ever fired. You're about to discover how geography, culture, and sheer human ingenuity shaped these incredible structures, each one telling a story of its time, its builders, and the people who depended on them for safety. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an exploration of how medieval minds turned stone, wood, and iron into enduring symbols of security and strategy. So come with me as we step across the threshold of time, raise the portcullis of mystery, and reveal the astonishing truths hidden for centuries within the world's most legendary castles. Think about the very first castles that dotted the European landscape. They were a far cry from the stone giants we picture today. In the centuries following the Norman conquest, the preferred design was the Motte and Bailey Castle. Its entrance was almost laughably simple by later standards, a gap in the wooden palisade wall, perhaps protected by a basic wooden gate and a ditch. This was a time of local skirmishes and quick builds, where speed of construction was often more important than impregnable defense. The primary threat might be a small band of raiders, not a massive, organized army with specialized siege engines. The entrance was just that, an entrance, a way in and out. It was a functional necessity, not yet a devastating weapon. Everything changed with the development and widespread use of the trebuchet and the battering ram. As siege warfare became a sophisticated science of physics and persistence, castle architects were forced to respond in kind. They began building in stone, and with that shift, the entrance transformed from a simple doorway into the most heavily fortified part of the entire structure. Why the entrance? Because it was, by its very nature, the weakest point. It was the only part of the castle that had to have a hole in it. An army wouldn't waste time trying to knock down a 40-foot thick wall when they could focus all their fury on the one spot designed to open. So the challenge became turning that inherent vulnerability into a devastating strength. This led to an incredible era of architectural innovation. Builders started thinking in layers. Instead of one door, why not two? And why not put a killing ground between them? The concept of the gatehouse was born, a multi-story stone fortress built around the entrance itself. This wasn't just a passage, it was a building designed for battle. Above the passageway, they incorporated murder holes, allowing defenders to attack invaders who made it through the first door. They added arrow slits or meurtrières covering every angle of approach. The drawbridge evolved from a simple plank into a counterweighted machine operated by hidden winches, and the portcullis, a massive ironclad grating, could be dropped in an instant to seal a breach. But this evolution wasn't just a military one, it was also a political and social statement. A king or a powerful lord wasn't just building a strong door, he was building an imposing, awe-inspiring facade. The entrance became a symbol of his absolute authority. The towering gatehouse, often decorated with his coat of arms, was the first thing any visitor would see. It sent a clear, unmistakable message. You are entering the domain of someone powerful, protected, and divinely ordained. The journey through the entrance complex through multiple gates, under murder holes, and between portcullises was a psychological experience designed to humble even invited guests. You can see this dramatic evolution perfectly illustrated by comparing early Norman keeps with later fortresses. Look at the stark, functional entrance of the White Tower in London, and then compare it to the breathtakingly complex and layered gatehouses of castles like Caernarfon in Wales or Harlech. These later structures are like Russian nesting dolls of defense, where an attacker had to overcome obstacle after obstacle, each more deadly than the last. And perhaps the ultimate expression of this architectural arms race can be seen in Crusader castles like the famous Crac des Chevaliers. Here, the entrance is a dizzying, disorienting labyrinth of ramps, tight turns, and gates designed to confuse and slow an attacking force to a crawl, making them utterly vulnerable the entire time. This wasn't just a door, it was a masterpiece of defensive planning, the culmination of centuries of painful lessons learned on battlefields across the world. Now let's focus on one of the most iconic elements of any castle entrance, the drawbridge. While it's easy to picture a simple wooden plank bridging a moat, the reality was far more ingenious. This was not a passive structure, it was a dynamic, multifunctional machine central to the castle's defense. When raised, it became a formidable vertical barrier, sealing the gateway shut and adding another layer of thick wood to the door behind it. When lowered, it wasn't just offering a path across, it was offering a controlled and potentially treacherous invitation. The mechanics behind these massive moving bridges were a testament to medieval engineering. The earliest versions were likely simple bascule bridges, pivoting on a central axle and hauled up by ropes or chains. But the true innovation came with the counterweighted drawbridge. Imagine a huge wooden arm hidden within the gatehouse structure, with the bridge on one end and a massive stone or lead counterweight on the other. Using a winch and a complex system of pulleys, a small team of guards could operate this heavy mechanism with surprising efficiency. The counterweight did most of the work, allowing the bridge to be raised or lowered with controlled speed. These winches and gears were always operated from inside, deep within the protected stone walls, making it impossible for anyone outside to interfere with the mechanism. Some drawbridges were designed with a more sinister purpose, to act as a trap. These were often built as a tilting bridge or a seesaw design. From the outside, it looked stable and secure, capable of holding the weight of a column of soldiers or a heavy supply cart. But the defenders inside could release a hidden latch. The moment enough enemy soldiers crowded onto it, the far end would suddenly drop, plunging them into the ditch or moat below. This ditch, often called a killing zone, would be studded with sharpened stakes or simply filled with deep water, leaving the attackers trapped, injured, and completely exposed to arrows and other projectiles fired from the battlements above. This clever trick turned an offensive advance into a defensive victory in a matter of seconds. Beyond its physical function, the drawbridge was a powerful tool of psychological warfare. Its very presence sent a clear, daily message. For the local populace and any potential visitor, the raised bridge was a visual symbol of separation and control. It emphasized the divide between the powerful lord within his stone fortress and everyone else outside. For an approaching army, the sight of the bridge being hastily drawn up was the ultimate sign of rejection and defiance. It transformed the castle from a place you could potentially negotiate with into an impenetrable island of stone. Anyone standing at the edge of that moat, looking up at the raised bridge and the grim gatehouse behind it, would have felt a profound sense of vulnerability. They were out in the open while the defenders held all the power, safe behind their walls, literally holding the key to entry. The drawbridge made it abundantly clear that access was a privilege granted solely at the discretion of those inside. But if the drawbridge was the controlled invitation, the portcullis was the final, unforgiving slam of the door. Imagine a massive grid of oak beams, sheathed in iron and bristling with sharp spikes along its bottom edge. This wasn't a door that swung open, it was a weapon that dropped, a vertical guillotine designed to seal a passageway in the blink of an eye. These formidable barriers were housed in deep, narrow slots carved into the stonework on either side of the gate passage. When raised, it vanished into the ceiling, a hidden threat. When lowered, it became an immovable object of wood and iron, often the last line of defense between an invader and the castle's heart. The true genius of the portcullis was rarely in a single gate, but in their use in pairs or even trios. A typical gatehouse passage might have one portcullis at the outer entrance and another further in, creating a deadly enclosed space between them known as a killing culvert. An attacking force that managed to break through the first outer door would find themselves funneled into this narrow stone tunnel, only to be staring at a second, equally imposing iron grate. They were now trapped in a box with no way forward and no easy retreat, perfectly positioned for the defenders above to unleash hell. Through the murder holes in the ceiling, they would rain down rocks, pour boiling water or oil, or even drop quicklime, which would blind and choke them in the confined space. This multi-layered system turned a simple corridor into the most dangerous place on the battlefield. Operating these heavy beasts was a feat of engineering and manpower. The mechanisms were cleverly hidden within the thick walls of the gatehouse, accessible only to the defenders. A large wooden winch, known as a windlass, was turned by a team of guards, winding or unwinding thick chains or ropes connected to the top of the portcullis. Some larger versions used a complex system of counterweights to make the lifting process slightly easier, but it was still a labor-intensive and slow process. This is why the decision to drop the portcullis was so final. It couldn't be raised again quickly in the heat of battle. It was a permanent lockdown, a signal that all negotiation was over and the castle was sealing itself shut. Beyond its brutal physical function, the portcullis held deep symbolic power. Its spiked bottom edge, often seen in period illustrations, looked like the jagged teeth of some great stone beast. This is why they earned the grim nickname, the Iron Teeth of the Castle. For anyone approaching, that visible grid of iron was a constant reminder of the lethal force that awaited them. It was a symbol of absolute authority and unyielding defense. The sight of it, whether raised in a silent threat or lowered in definitive refusal, communicated a clear message. The lord of this castle was prepared for war at a moment's notice, and he would defend his domain to the very last. It was the ultimate expression of a fortress's purpose, not just to resist, but to dominate and deter. But if the portcullis was the guillotine, then the murder holes were the executioners waiting above. These seemingly simple openings in the ceiling of a gate passage were arguably one of the most terrifying defenses a medieval attacker could face. The name itself sends a chill, murder hole, and it comes directly from the old French word meurtrier, which literally means a murdering place or a killing opening. This was not a euphemism, it was a brutally accurate description of its purpose. While the drawbridge and portcullis were designed to control and block, the murder hole existed for one reason only: to inflict maximum carnage in a confined, inescapable space. The strategic placement of these openings was a masterstroke of defensive planning. They were almost always located in the ceiling of the narrow stone tunnel that ran through the gatehouse, directly between two portcullises or heavy inner doors. This meant that even if an attacking force fueled by adrenaline and sheer numbers managed to smash through the first gate, their victory would be instantly short-lived. They would pour into a shadowy, confined passage, only to find their way blocked by yet another barrier. In that moment of crowded confusion, packed together and unable to move forward or easily retreat, they were at their most vulnerable. And that is precisely when the horror would begin from above. The arsenal dropped through these holes was designed to exploit this terrible vulnerability in the most gruesome ways possible. Large rocks or heavy millstones could be dropped to crush skulls and break bones, creating a bloody obstacle course for those behind. Boiling water was a common and readily available substance, scalding victims and making the stone floor slick and treacherous. The infamous boiling oil, while perhaps less common than popular culture suggests due to its expense, was a devastating weapon that would sear through leather and mail. But one of the most feared substances was quicklime, a caustic powder that would react violently with water or moisture in the eyes and lungs, blinding and choking men in a cloud of agony. Sometimes defenders would even mix quicklime with boiling water, creating a horrific, corrosive slurry. The effect was not just physical but deeply psychological. To be trapped in a dark stone box while unseen enemies above rained down indiscriminate death created a sense of utter helplessness and terror. It is important to visualize the architecture to truly appreciate the grim efficiency of this system. The openings themselves were often no larger than a square foot, just big enough to pass projectiles through but small enough to be easily defended by a few people. The room above the passage was known as the murder room or garderobe, and it was a place of grim duty. From this protected vantage point, defenders could hear the chaos below, see the flicker of torchlight on enemy helmets, and then unleash their deadly cargo with chilling precision. The entire design was a perfect, brutal trap, turning the castle's greatest weakness, its front door, into its most effective killing field. Every inch of the entrance was a calculated part of this lethal puzzle, ensuring that breaching the gate was only the beginning of the nightmare, not the end. While the murder holes and portcullises were the terrifying weapons of the entrance, they were all controlled from a single, masterful structure, the gatehouse. Think of this not just as a doorway, but as the brain and brawn of the entire castle's defensive system. This was a fortress within a fortress, a multi-story stone command center that loomed over the approach, housing everything needed to wage a relentless defense. It was far more than an archway. It was a self-contained universe of military planning, engineering, and daily life, all dedicated to one singular purpose: absolute control over who entered. Stepping inside a great gatehouse like the one at Harlech Castle would have been a disorienting experience for any visitor, invited or not. You wouldn't simply walk straight through. Instead, you'd be forced into a series of sharp, 90-degree turns within a narrow, shadowy passage. This wasn't poor design. It was a deliberate act of psychological and tactical genius. These twisting corridors prevented attackers from gaining any momentum or from seeing what lay ahead. A battering ram is useless in a tight corner, and a charging knight loses all his advantage when he has to slow to a crawl. More importantly, it completely eliminated any line of sight for archers outside. There was no shooting an arrow straight through the gate and into the courtyard beyond. Every inch of your path was covered from multiple angles. Above your head, the gatehouse was a buzzing hive of activity. The ground floor passage was just the throat. The real power resided on the upper floors. Here, you would find the massive winch rooms where teams of guards would strain at the windlasses, raising and lowering the incredibly heavy portcullises and drawbridges. The thick stone walls muffled the sound of groaning wood and clanking chains, keeping the mechanisms a secret from those below. In adjacent guard chambers, soldiers stationed at narrow arrow slits or muetriers kept a constant watch on the approach road and the passageway interior. These slits weren't just holes, they were carefully engineered to provide a wide field of fire for the defender, while presenting an impossibly small target for anyone shooting back. The complexity of these structures is staggering. Some featured false doors that led only to dead-end walls, wasting precious time and energy for any invader who breached the outer shell. Overlapping fields of fire meant that every single square foot of the entrance passage was covered by at least 2, if not 3, different arrow slits or murder holes. There was no safe corner, no blind spot. The gatehouse was also designed for long-term sustainability. It often contained its own small well or water source, storage rooms for weapons and projectiles, and even a chapel where guards could seek spiritual solace without having to leave their post. This self-sufficiency meant that even if the rest of the castle was under pressure, the gatehouse could hold out, functioning as a final redoubt. Controlling this nerve center was the key to controlling the entire castle. Its loss was almost always catastrophic. History is filled with sieges where the fall of the gatehouse spelled immediate doom for the defenders. Once attackers secured those winch rooms and guard chambers, they could throw open the gates to the rest of their army, and the battle was effectively over. This is why the most loyal and experienced soldiers were stationed here, and why so much architectural effort was poured into making it the strongest point, not the weakest. The gatehouse was the ultimate expression of the castle's will to survive, a towering symbol of defiance that told the world entry was not a right, but a privilege granted only on the most stringent and deadly terms. But the castle's defensive genius didn't stop at the gatehouse. It extended outward, creating a deadly welcome mat known as the Barbican. Imagine approaching what you think is the main gate, only to find yourself funneled into a separate, smaller fortress entirely, complete with its own high walls, towers, and a heavily guarded gate. This was the Barbican, a standalone outwork designed to be the first and most brutal test for any attacking force. Its purpose was diabolically simple: to push the killing ground outside the castle's main walls, forcing enemies to endure a gauntlet of death long before they even reached the primary entrance. The design of a Barbican was a masterclass in controlling an enemy's movement. They were almost always approached by a narrow, exposed causeway or a bridge that ran alongside the main castle wall. This meant attackers couldn't spread out. They were compressed into a tight column, utterly vulnerable to arrow fire raining down from the Barbican's walls and the main castle battlements to their side. There was no room to maneuver siege engines effectively, and no shield could protect from attacks coming from above and the flank simultaneously. The entire approach was a shooting gallery, and the attackers were the targets. Perhaps the most cunning aspect of some Barbicans was their role as a tactical deception. From a distance, a well-designed Barbican might appear to be a weaker, secondary entrance, a tempting target for a focused assault. An attacking commander might believe that concentrating his forces on this seemingly vulnerable outpost was the key to a quick victory, but this was a fatal miscalculation. By taking the bait, the army would commit itself to the exact killing zone the defenders had prepared. The moment they surged into the Barbican's confined courtyard, the trap would be sprung. The outer gate they had just broken through would be sealed behind them, and they would find themselves trapped in a stone pen, surrounded on all sides by high walls lined with defenders. From there, the murder holes, arrow loops, and dropping stones would turn the space into a slaughterhouse. The Barbican didn't just defend the gate, it actively invited and then annihilated the attack. This outer layer of defense highlights a critical evolution in medieval military thinking. It wasn't enough to simply be strong. A castle had to be smart. Barbicans show us that architects were thinking psychologically, using deception and confusion as primary weapons. They preyed on an attacker's desperation and aggression, turning their greatest strengths, their momentum and numbers, into their greatest weaknesses. The journey to the castle gate was no longer just an approach. It was a lethal puzzle where every step forward was a step deeper into a carefully laid trap. The Barbican ensured that the real battle was often over before the main drawbridge was ever even touched. And while the Barbican controlled the approach, the moat defined the very space around the castle, creating a forbidding no-man's land that separated the fortress from the world. When we picture a moat, we almost always imagine a wide, serene body of water, shimmering in the sunlight and perfectly reflecting the towering stone walls. But this romantic image hides a much more complex and often drier reality. The truth is, a water-filled moat was a luxury, a feat of hydrological engineering that was impossible in many locations. Far more common was the dry moat, a deep, steep-sided ditch carved directly into the earth or bedrock, and these ditches were far from empty. They were often studded with rows of sharpened stakes called chevaux de frise, littered with caltrops to maim horses, or even concealing hidden pits covered with weak branches and turf, designed to collapse under the weight of a soldier or siege engine. A dry moat was a brutal obstacle course that had to be navigated under a constant hail of arrows. For those castles fortunate enough to have a reliable water source, the aquatic moat provided a different set of formidable advantages. The most obvious was its role as a barrier against tunneling. Siege mining, where attackers would dig a tunnel to undermine a wall and collapse it, was a common and devastating tactic. A water-filled moat made this nearly impossible. Any attempt to dig would immediately flood the tunnel, drowning the sappers and ruining their work. But the water also played a clever psychological trick. On a still day, the perfectly mirrored surface would double the apparent height of the castle walls, making the fortification look twice as imposing and impregnable to anyone sizing it up from a distance. This reflection was a silent, intimidating boast of the castle's strength, a visual deception meant to demoralize a would-be attacker before a single shot was fired. The real secrets of the moat, however, often lay beneath its surface. In some castles, the moat wasn't just a barrier, it was a concealed highway. Certain fortifications featured discreet underwater postern gates, small, hidden entryways set at or just below the waterline. These were known only to the defenders and could be used to receive supplies via boat under the cover of darkness or to launch surprise attacks against a besieging army that had grown complacent on the safe, dry land. Even more ingenious were the water gates found in riverine or coastal castles, like those at Kenilworth or Dover. These were full-sized entrances accessible by boat, allowing the castle to be resupplied by water even during a prolonged land siege, turning a potential weakness into a critical lifeline. Ultimately, the moat's greatest power may have been symbolic. It physically and visually isolated the castle, transforming it into an island of order, power, and mystery separate from the outside world. That body of water, or even the yawning gap of a dry ditch, created a powerful psychological divide. It reinforced the social hierarchy, emphasizing the separation between the noble lord in his stone fortress and everyone else. For an attacking army, the moat represented the first and most daunting physical challenge. a wide, open space they had to cross with no cover, all while being watched from the high walls above. It was a demoralizing vista that made the castle seem utterly unassailable, proving that the best defenses are those that win the battle in the enemy's mind long before the first sword is ever drawn. While the formidable gates and deadly traps were designed to keep enemies out, the architects of these fortresses were also masters of discreet exit. Beyond the main entrance, hidden in the shadows of the masonry, lay a network of secret passages and escape routes known as sally ports. These were not signs of cowardice but tools of brilliant strategy, ensuring that a castle was never truly a prison for those inside. A besieged garrison wasn't just sitting ducks waiting to be starved out. They retained the power of movement, the element of surprise, and a final, desperate path to survival. The design of these covert exits was a testament to medieval cunning. Builders went to incredible lengths to camouflage these openings, seamlessly integrating them into the castle's fabric. A sally port might be hidden behind a movable section of wall that looked exactly like the surrounding stonework, its edges concealed by clever mortar work. Others were disguised as innocent features, a false hearth in a great hall, the back of a deep cupboard, or even a specific flagstone in the floor that could be pivoted aside. The entrance to a secret stairway might be tucked away at the back of a dimly lit garderobe, a place no one would think to search. The goal was to make these passages invisible to all but a handful of trusted individuals who knew the castle's deepest secrets. Their uses were varied and vitally important. The most common function was for launching surprise attacks or sallies against a besieging force. While the main gates remained sealed and impregnable, a small, highly mobile force of knights and men-at-arms could slip out of a hidden postern gate under cover of darkness or bad weather. They could then raid the enemy's siege lines, burn their encampments, destroy their valuable trebuchets, and sow chaos and confusion before melting back into the castle unseen. This ability to strike back was crucial for defender morale. It broke the monotony of a siege and demonstrated that the attackers were not safe, even in their own camps. In times of ultimate crisis, these passages became lifelines. If a castle was on the verge of falling, a hidden route could allow the lord, his family, and key defenders to escape capture or certain death. A famous and tangible example of this is at Conwy Castle in Wales, where a narrow, hidden staircase wins its way down through the solid rock foundation from the royal apartments directly to the riverbank. This ensured that even if the outer walls were breached, King Edward I himself could have been whisked away to safety by boat. Similarly, at the Great Fortress of Dover, a complex network of tunnels, including the famous Cannon's Gateway, provided covert access to the cliffs and the sea far below, offering both an escape and a resupply route that was nearly impossible to blockade from land. These hidden pathways also served more peaceful, yet equally critical, daily functions. They allowed messengers to come and go during a siege, carrying pleas for help to allies or intelligence on enemy movements. They enabled the garrison to gather fresh water from a hidden spring or stream outside the walls if their internal supply was compromised. In some cases, they even connected the castle to a nearby church or monastery, allowing the inhabitants to attend to spiritual needs without venturing through the main gates. This duality of purpose for both war and peace, for aggression and survival, shows that the medieval mind was always thinking several moves ahead. The castle entrance was not a one-way barrier. It was a controlled interface with the outside world, and its secrets ensured that those inside always retained the initiative, the hope of escape, and the power to strike back when least expected. Yet the true psychological power of the castle entrance lay not just in its formidable appearance, but in the carefully orchestrated experience it forced upon anyone who dared to approach. The journey from the outer gate to the inner courtyard was a masterclass in sensory overload and controlled anxiety. Imagine being a messenger or a potential foe, stepping onto that narrow approach bridge. Your view is immediately funneled upwards, forced to take in the staggering height of the gatehouse looming above, its dark arrow slits feeling like hostile eyes tracking your every move. The sounds alone were a weapon, the hollow echo of your own footsteps on the wooden drawbridge, the distant metallic clank of portcullis, gears from within the stone walls, and the unsettling shouts of guards echoing from impossible-to-locate openings. This auditory landscape was designed to disorient and isolate, making even a large party feel alone and exposed. Architects employed forced perspective and deliberate imbalances to heighten this sense of unease. Gate passages were often built with slightly sloping floors or asymmetrical walls, subtle distortions that played tricks on the mind and made visitors feel physically off balance without understanding why. The light would dramatically shift from the bright exterior to a deep, shadowy gloom within the passage, where the only illumination might be a single slit of light from a murder hole above, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air and reminding you of your vulnerability. The air itself would grow colder and damp, carrying the scent of wet stone and old iron, a stark contrast to the open fields behind you. This entire sensory journey was a psychological gauntlet, meticulously engineered to strip away confidence and replace it with a gnawing sense of apprehension long before any physical threat even materialized. Symbolism was carved into the very stones to reinforce a hierarchy of power and divine sanction. Above the main gate, elaborate tympanums often featured religious scenes, perhaps a depiction of the Last Judgment or the castle's patron saint vanquishing demons. This sent an unambiguous message. The Lord within was not just powerful, but morally righteous and under divine protection. To attack him was to challenge God's will itself. Flanking the entrance, heraldic beasts like lions, dragons, or griffins were rendered in stone, their mouths agape in a perpetual snarl. These weren't mere decorations. They were proclamations of the family's lineage, their strength, and their ferocious will to defend their rights. For a medieval viewer literate in this visual language, these symbols communicated a complex story of legacy, authority, and terrifying potential for violence. The psychological impact of this architectural theater was a calculated part of medieval military strategy. A demoralized army is a hesitant army, and hesitation in a siege is fatal. Commanders knew that if they could make their stronghold appear so imposing, so foreboding, and so mentally draining to approach, they might never have to fight a battle at all. The goal was to win the war in the enemy's mind before the first ladder was ever placed against the wall. The sight of a well-defended entrance, the memory of that dark, echoing passage, and the symbolism of divine power could be enough to make an attacking force question their mission, weaken their resolve, and ultimately choose to negotiate or retreat rather than face the unknown horrors that clearly lay within. The castle gate was a performance, and its opening act was fear. This relentless focus on strengthening the entrance didn't go unanswered. It sparked an equally brilliant and brutal evolution in the art of siegecraft. The relationship between castle builders and siege engineers became a deadly dance, a continuous feedback loop of innovation and counter-innovation that spanned centuries. For every new defensive feature, attackers devised a new way to overcome it, turning the space before the castle gate into the most technologically advanced and horrifyingly violent laboratory of the medieval world. This wasn't a static contest, it was a high-stakes arms race where the prize was survival itself. Attackers developed a terrifying arsenal of specialized tools designed specifically to defeat the layered defenses of a gatehouse. The most straightforward was the battering ram, But this was no simple log carried by a few men. The most effective rams were massive, iron-tipped beams, often suspended by chains or ropes within a mobile, roofed shed called a pentise or cat. This structure, covered in fresh, wet animal hides to protect against fire arrows and boiling liquids, allowed crews to wheel the ram right up to the gate and swing it with relentless, rhythmic force against the reinforced wood. The thunderous boom of the ram striking the door, echoing across the battlefield, was both a physical assault and a psychological weapon, meant to demoralize those inside with each shuddering impact. To counter the lethal fire from the battlements and murder holes, besiegers used mantlets, large, mobile wooden shields, and so's sturdier, wheeled roofs that provided cover for men filling in moats or working at the base of the walls. But the most impressive siege engine designed to overcome height was the siege tower, or belfry. These were multi-story wooden towers on wheels built taller than the castle walls. They were painstakingly moved into position overfilled in sections of the moat, often with their own built-in battering rams on the lower levels. The upper levels were packed with archers who could then fire down into the castle courtyard, neutralizing the defenders' arrow fire and providing cover for assault troops who would lower a drawbridge from the tower directly onto the battlements, effectively turning the castle's own height advantage against it. Perhaps the most insidious tactic was mining or sapping. This involved digging a tunnel beneath the castle walls, specifically targeting the corner of a gatehouse or tower. The tunnel would be shored up with wooden timbers. Once complete, the sappers would set fire to the supports, causing the tunnel to collapse and, with any luck, bringing a large section of the stone wall above crashing down in a heap of rubble. This created a new, brutal breach that bypassed all the sophisticated traps of the main entrance. Defenders had to be constantly listening for the faint, telltale sounds of digging from below, and often dug countermines, their own tunnels, to intercept the attackers underground, leading to frantic, claustrophobic hand-to-hand combat in pitch-black passages deep beneath the earth. A perfect and tragic example of this deadly interplay is the famous siege of Château-Gaillard in France in 1203–4. Built by Richard the Lionheart, the castle was considered the pinnacle of military design, a strong castle indeed. Its complex entrance featured multiple walled baileys, a fortified barbican, and a steep, rocky approach. The French attacker, King Philip II, initially found the outer defenses utterly impregnable to direct assault. However, through a combination of cunning and ruthless observation, his forces discovered a critical flaw. A forgotten, unguarded latrine chute in the outer chapel wall, just large enough for a single man to squeeze through, provided a covert entry point. Once inside, this small team was able to open the gates from within, showcasing that even the mightiest fortifications could be undone by the smallest oversight. The fall of Château-Gaillard wasn't just a military defeat. It was a seismic event that demonstrated no defense was perfect and that ingenuity could trump even the strongest stone. This relentless back and forth, this deadly dance between the hammer of the siege and the anvil of the gate, is what truly drove the incredible innovation in military architecture for hundreds of years, each new conflict writing a bloody lesson that would be studied and incorporated into the next generation of castles. Yet for all the ingenious machinery of the drawbridge and the intimidating power of the portcullis, these defenses were ultimately inert without the human intelligence to operate them. The entire formidable system of the castle entrance relied on a single, critical element, the gatekeepers. These were not just simple soldiers standing watch. They were among the most highly trusted and rigorously vetted individuals in the entire Lord's employ, chosen for their unwavering loyalty, sharp senses, and deep familiarity with the castle's most intimate secrets. While the stone and iron provided the muscle, the gatekeepers were the ever-vigilant eyes and ears, the living nerve center of the entrance's defense. Their responsibilities extended far beyond merely asking, "Who goes there?" A senior gatekeeper, sometimes holding the formal title of porter, possessed a physical key to the castle's security, quite literally. He would have held a massive, ornate iron keyring, each key corresponding to a different lock on the various gates and portcullises within the gatehouse. But his true key was knowledge. He was the keeper of the castle's clandestine protocols, the secret knocks used after dark, the passwords that changed with the seasons, and the coded signals shouted from the battlements to distinguish friend from foe in the fog of war. He knew the faces of every resident knight, man-at-arms, and servant, and he was an expert at reading the body language and stories of unknown visitors, determining if a bedraggled merchant was truly who he claimed to be or a scout for an advancing army. The operational duties were equally demanding. The gatekeeper had to understand the complex mechanics of the entrance. He directed the teams of guards operating the great winches for the drawbridge and portcullises, knowing exactly when to raise or lower them for maximum effect. He was responsible for the maintenance of these mechanisms, ensuring the ropes were sound, the metal parts were greased, and the counterweights were secure. A portcullis that jammed in its stone groove during an attack because of a neglected maintenance check could mean the fall of the entire castle. His post was in the gatehouse guardroom, a space with a constant view of the approach road through narrow arrow slits, where he would spend hours monitoring the horizon for any sign of movement, no matter how faint. This position of ultimate trust meant that the gatekeeper was also a prime target for subterfuge. Besieging armies knew that bribing or coercing a single guard could be far more effective than months of costly assault. History is littered with tragic examples where this human element failed. In 1396, the great castle of Edinburgh was captured by a handful of Scottish men led by William St. Clare and William Black, who allegedly scaled the cliffs and found a gate left unguarded or opened by a treacherous sentry. While the details are shrouded in legend, the story underscores a universal fear that no matter how strong the walls, a single moment of negligence or betrayal could unravel everything. A gatekeeper tempted by a pouch of silver or threatened with harm to his family posed a greater threat than any battering ram. This immense pressure forged a unique culture among these guardians of the gate. Their loyalty was not just to the Lord but to the very idea of the castle as a sanctuary. They were the first line of defense and the last hope for those inside. Their vigilance each night as they barred the massive doors symbolized the transition from the perils of the outside world to the security within. The rhythmic clang of the locks and the groan of the drawbridge being raised were sounds of safety for the inhabitants, a nightly ritual that affirmed the gatekeeper's sacred duty. In the end, the mightiest fortification was only as strong as the character of the men who stood watch over its entrance, a powerful reminder that the most advanced technology is meaningless without the unwavering human spirit to wield it. But beyond the clanking of portcullises and the strategic placement of arrow slits, the castle entrance served a purpose far more nuanced than pure defense. It was a stage for a meticulously crafted performance of power, designed to communicate a message that was understood by everyone, from the lowliest peasant to a visiting king. Every sculpted stone and carved crest was a deliberate part of this visual language, transforming the gate from a mere barrier into a monumental billboard advertising the Lord's wealth, lineage, and divine right to rule. This was architecture as propaganda, and its intended audience was anyone who laid eyes upon it. The most immediate and obvious symbol of this power was heraldry. Flanking the main gateway, often carved in deep relief on the sturdy gatehouse towers, were the Lord's coat of arms, These weren't just decorative flourishes, they were a medieval barcode, instantly communicating the family's identity, their alliances through marriage, and their valorous deeds. A lion might signify bravery, an eagle represented far-reaching power, and specific color combinations could denote royal favor or ancient lineage. For a largely illiterate population, these symbols were as legible as a written proclamation. A traveler approaching a castle like Bodiam in England would be greeted by the massive heraldic shields of the Dallingrig family, who built it, and their patrons, the powerful Earls of Warwick. The message was unmistakable. You are not just entering any stronghold, you are entering the domain of a man connected to some of the most formidable figures in the realm. This visual declaration set the social tone immediately, reinforcing a rigid hierarchy before a single word was spoken. Religious iconography was equally powerful, blending earthly authority with heavenly mandate. It was incredibly common to find statues of the castle's patron saint standing guard in niches above the gate, or intricate carvings of biblical scenes depicting righteous victories over evil. At the stunning Castel del Monte in Italy, built by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, the entire structure is a geometric marvel, but its single, classically inspired entrance immediately elevates the visitor's experience, suggesting the emperor's connection to the wisdom and power of ancient Roman emperors. By placing these sacred figures at the threshold, the Lord was making a profound claim. His rule was not just sanctioned by God, but actively protected by divine forces. To challenge his authority was not merely a political act, it was a sin. This fusion of spiritual and temporal power was a psychological masterstroke, designed to instill a sense of reverent awe or fearful hesitation in all who sought to enter. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the entrance itself was a blunt instrument of intimidation. Builders employed clever tricks of architecture to make gates appear even larger and more imposing than they actually were. Towers were built to loom over the approach, forcing visitors to crane their necks upwards. The gateway itself might be designed with a stepped or recessed arch, creating deep shadows that made the opening seem like a dark, unknowable maw. The materials spoke volumes too. While the rear of the castle might use rougher, local stone, the entrance facade was often constructed from finely cut, expensive ashlar blocks, sometimes even imported from distant quarries. This was a blatant display of disposable wealth, showing that the Lord could afford the best materials and the most skilled stonemasons for the one part of the castle everyone would see and remember. This theatrical experience was carefully curated for different audiences. For a visiting peer or a royal ambassador, the grandeur was a sign of respect and a demonstration of the host's own sophistication and power, setting the stage for a negotiation between equals or near equals. For the local populace, however, the message was one of dominance and unassailable authority. The castle was the physical heart of the Lord's economic and judicial control. Its towering, decorated entrance was a daily reminder of his right to collect taxes, raise armies, and dispense justice. It made the abstract concept of lordship tangibly, awfully real. In an age without mass media, the castle gate was the ultimate brand logo, a permanent and unchanging statement that this land and everyone on it belonged to him. The drawbridge didn't just cross a moat, it crossed a social chasm, and every step across it was a journey into the power of the man who controlled it. This architectural cunning extended far beyond the main killing zones, venturing into the realm of psychological manipulation with the use of deliberate deceptions. Among the most clever tricks in a castle architect's repertoire were false doors and purpose-built dead-end passages. These features were not designed to kill outright, but to confuse, disorient, and ultimately waste the most precious resource a besieging army had during the chaos of an assault: time and momentum. In the critical moments after an outer wall was breached, confusion could be a more potent weapon than any sword. Imagine the scene from an attacker's perspective. You and your comrades have just fought your way through a hail of arrows, somehow managed to cross the moat, and now you've finally splintered the mighty outer door with a battering ram. You pour through the breach, hearts pounding with a mix of terror and triumph, expecting to surge into the open courtyard. Instead, you find yourself in another narrow, shadowy corridor. The passage might fork unexpectedly. One path appears to lead inward, perhaps through an archway that looks promisingly like the way forward. Taking it, you round a corner only to find your progress abruptly halted by a blank, unyielding stone wall. You've been funneled into a dead end, a cul-de-sac with no exit. In that moment of stunned realization, the shouts of your confused comrades echoing behind you, you are utterly trapped. And from the murder holes that suddenly become visible in the ceiling of this perfect killing jar, the real defense begins. At other times, the deception was even more elaborate. Some castles, particularly those built with concentric designs, featured entire false gateways. From a distance, these would appear to be a secondary or perhaps less guarded entrance, a tempting target for a focused attack. An invading commander might direct his best troops and a siege engine toward this seemingly weaker point, believing he had found a clever shortcut, but this was all part of the plan. This gate would lead not into the castle, but into a confined courtyard surrounded on all sides by the castle's highest walls, a carefully prepared killing field where every arrow slit and battlement looked inward. The moment a critical mass of enemy soldiers entered this space, the portcullis behind them would slam shut, and they would find themselves not at the heart of the fortress, but in a captive audience for a horrific display of defensive fire from every direction. The strategic genius of these deceptions was multifaceted. First, they sapped the attacking force's morale. Nothing is more dispiriting to a soldier than the feeling of being led into a trap, of having their courage and effort wasted by an unseen, clever foe. Second, they broke the crucial momentum of the assault. An attack is a wave of energy and violence that needs to keep moving forward to succeed. By forcing that wave to hit a dead end or swirl around in confusion, the defenders effectively dissipated its force, giving themselves precious time to reorganize, reinforce other points, and systematically pick off the now stalled invaders. Finally, these tricks divided the attacking force. One group might head down the false passage while another hesitated, creating disorder and conflicting commands among the enemy leadership. In the fog of war, such confusion could be fatal. This emphasis on misdirection reveals a medieval military mindset that valued intellect and psychological warfare just as highly as brute strength, proving that the most formidable castle was not just made of stone but of clever ideas. Medieval castle builders were masterful students of the land, understanding that the most formidable defense was not built but found. They possessed an almost artistic ability to read a landscape, identifying natural features that could be harnessed and amplified into insurmountable obstacles. This deep synergy between geography and architecture meant that no two castle entrances were ever truly alike. Each was a unique response to the specific challenges and opportunities presented by its site, turning the very earth itself into a silent, steadfast guardian. Consider the dramatic perch of a mountain castle like Neuschwanstein's Inspiration, Hohenschwangau, or the formidable strongholds of the Alps. Here, the approach was everything. Builders didn't fight the steep terrain, they embraced it. The access road, or approach causeway, would be carved directly into the mountainside, often zigzagging back and forth in a series of punishing switchbacks. This design was brutally effective. It eliminated any possibility of a cavalry charge and made it impossible to bring large, heavy siege engines like trebuchets or towers anywhere near the walls. Attackers were forced to advance slowly, single file, on foot, all the while exposed to arrow fire from above. The entrance itself would be a simple, heavily reinforced gate set into a sheer rock face, often at the top of a final, dizzying flight of steps. The mountain did the work of 1,000 men, and the architects simply had to provide the door. In stark contrast, castles built along rivers or coastlines engaged in a completely different dialogue with their environment. For these fortresses, water was not a barrier to be crossed but a highway to be controlled. The classic image of a castle reflected in a still moat is charming, but the reality of a riverine castle was far more dynamic. Their primary entrance was often a water gate, a fortified archway leading directly from the river into the castle's lower bailey. This was the castle's lifeline. At the mighty fortress of Dover, the cannon's gateway allowed ships to resupply the garrison directly from the sea, even during a full land siege, making the castle virtually impossible to starve out. These water gates were also crucial for escape. If a land siege was lost, the lord and his family could slip away under cover of darkness by boat, vanishing down river to fight another day. The Watergate turned a potential vulnerability, a long, exposed waterfront, into the castle's greatest strategic asset. Perhaps no castle exemplifies the genius of geographical integration better than Scotland's Edinburgh Castle. Its entrance is a masterclass in using natural geology for defense. The castle is perched atop a volcanic plug, with cliffs soaring dramatically on 3 sides. The only viable approach is from the east, up a long, sloping ramp called the Royal Mile. But even this approach was a death trap. Attackers would be funneled into a narrow lane, with the high, fortified walls of the city itself on one side and a sheer drop on the other. The entrance gatehouse, added later, was almost an afterthought. The real defense was the terrifying, exposed climb to get to it. Any army attempting to assault Edinburgh had to contend with the psychological dread of that ascent long before they ever saw the business end of a portcullis. The castle's builders didn't need to dig a moat. Glaciers and volcanoes had done the excavation for them millions of years earlier. This incredible adaptability reveals a fundamental truth about medieval military engineering. It was a practice of clever opportunism rather than rigid dogma. Engineers didn't arrive with a single blueprint to impose on the land. Instead, they arrived with a deep toolkit of principles and observed what the land offered. A rocky promontory became a foundation for towering walls. A river bend was incorporated into a moating system. A cave network might be expanded into a secret postern tunnel. This flexibility was their greatest innovation. They saw the landscape not as an obstacle to be conquered with brute force, but as a partner in defense, a force multiplier that could make their stonework infinitely more powerful. The most successful castles weren't just built on the land. They were built from it, a perfect fusion of human ingenuity and nature's raw, enduring power. While the formidable defenses of the castle entrance were designed to withstand earthly armies, medieval builders also sought protection from a higher power, weaving faith and cultural identity directly into the stone and iron of their gateways. It was a profound belief that divine favor was the ultimate shield, and this conviction was made visible in the very threshold of the castle. Above the main gate, nestled within the archway known as the tympanum, you would often find intricate carvings of religious scenes. These weren't mere decorations, they were a form of spiritual armor, a depiction of the Virgin Mary, the castle's patron saint, or a dramatic scene like the Last Judgment served a dual purpose. For the defenders and inhabitants, it was a constant reminder that God was on their side, bolstering morale and fostering a sense of righteous cause. For any would-be attacker, however, it was a stark warning. It framed an assault on the castle not just as a military action, but as a sin against the divine order, a challenge to heavenly authority itself. This psychological layer added an immense weight to the decision to attack, potentially giving even the most ruthless commander pause. This integration of the sacred went far beyond simple carvings. In many castles, the gatehouse itself contained a fully functional chapel, often dedicated to Saint George, the patron saint of soldiers, or the Virgin Mary. This was a strategic and spiritual masterstroke. Placing a chapel directly over the main entrance meant that every person entering or leaving, whether a lord returning from hunt, a merchant bringing supplies, or a soldier heading to patrol, would pass under its holy auspices, receiving a silent blessing with every transit. For the guards stationed in the gatehouse, often for long and tense hours, having a chapel mere steps away provided immense comfort and a ready place for prayer before potential battle. It transformed the gatehouse from a purely militaristic space into a spiritually fortified one, suggesting that the castle was under the perpetual watch of both armed sentinels and guardian angels. The very stones of the entrance seemed to hum with a sense of protected sanctity. The flow of people and ideas, particularly during the Crusades, brought a breathtaking diversity of architectural styles to castle entrances, turning them into canvases of cultural expression. Crusader knights returning from the Holy Land incorporated elements they had seen in the formidable fortresses of the Middle East. They brought back knowledge of advanced military engineering, but also an appreciation for distinctive aesthetic touches. Meanwhile, on the Iberian Peninsula, the centuries-long Reconquista created a fascinating fusion of Christian and Islamic design, known as Mudéjar architecture. Here, you might find a castle gatehouse that is unmistakably European in its defensive purpose, yet adorned with the elegant, keyhole-shaped horseshoe arches and intricate, geometric tilework azulejos more commonly associated with Moorish alcazabas. These were not just borrowed styles, they were powerful statements. For a Christian lord building his castle on reclaimed land, using these motifs was a declaration of victory and dominance, a way of stamping his new authority onto a blended cultural landscape. Ultimately, these religious and cultural elements reveal that the castle entrance was a deeply symbolic interface between the inner world of the fortress and the outer world beyond. It was a space where the practical need for security met the human need for meaning and identity. The choice of a patron saint spoke to the specific devotions of the ruling family. The architectural style announced their travels, their influences, and their place in the wider world. A castle gate was never just a point of entry. It was a carefully curated first impression, a stone and mortar biography that communicated who the inhabitants were, what they believed, and the sources, both heavenly and earthly, from which they drew their power and protection. It was the final, crucial layer in the entrance's design, proving that the most enduring strength comes from a fusion of strong walls and even stronger beliefs. Yet for all their imposing strength and clever design, these mighty gateways were not invincible fortresses of stone and iron. They were complex machines made of organic and moving parts, each with its own inherent weakness. The very materials that gave them life also gave them vulnerability. The massive oak beams of the drawbridge, though incredibly strong, were susceptible to rot over time, especially where they met the damp stone of the gateway. The intricate systems of ropes, chains, and wooden gears that operated the portcullises required constant lubrication and inspection. A single frayed rope or rusted iron link could cause the entire mechanism to jam at the most critical moment. And of course, wood burns. No matter how thick, a gate saturated with oil or pitch by a besieging army could be transformed from a barrier into a towering inferno. its structural integrity crumbling in the intense heat. The grandeur of the entrance was, therefore, a facade that hid a relentless demand for maintenance, a never-ending cycle of repair and reinforcement that fell upon the castle's carpenters, blacksmiths, and engineers. This constant battle against decay and malfunction was a quiet, behind-the-scenes war that was just as important as any siege. The castle's garrison couldn't afford to wait for a threat to appear before checking the defenses. Daily and seasonal maintenance routines were a matter of life and death. Winch mechanisms had to be tested regularly, with teams of men practicing the rapid raising and lowering of the portcullis to ensure smooth operation. The ironwork on the gates needed to be inspected for rust and repaired, while the wood was treated with tar or other preservatives to stave off rot and make it less susceptible to fire. The moat had to be dredged to prevent it from silting up and becoming passable, and the stonework around the gate arch needed to be checked for cracks or weaknesses that could be exploited by a battering ram. A neglected castle was a vulnerable castle, and a lord who skimped on the wages of his skilled craftsmen was effectively gambling with the security of his entire domain. History provides stark lessons on the catastrophic consequences of such neglect. The famous siege of Rochester Castle in 1215 during the First Barons' War is a classic example. After successfully breaching the outer wall, King John's forces focused their assault on the mighty stone keep. Their primary target was the southeastern corner. Using the technique of mining, sappers tunneled beneath the wall, shored up the tunnel with wooden pig fat, a highly flammable material, and set it alight. The fire caused the tunnel to collapse, bringing a large section of the massive stone tower crashing down. While the defenders bravely held out from behind the resulting rubble, the breach was ultimately decisive. This event underscores a critical point. Even the thickest stone could be defeated if the methods to undermine it were not actively countered. It wasn't just about the strength of the door, but the integrity of the entire entrance structure, from its deepest foundations to its highest battlements. The human element, too, was a potential weak point that no amount of stone could fully eliminate. As we touched on with the gatekeepers, fatigue, complacency, and outright treachery were ever-present risks. A guard falling asleep on watch, a bribed sentry leaving a sally port unbarred, or a lazy engineer failing to replace a worn rope could create an opening far more effective than any siege engine. The fall of Chateau Gaillard, considered Richard the Lionheart's masterpiece, was famously attributed to French soldiers infiltrating through an apparently forgotten latrine chute. Whether this story is entirely accurate or not, it persists as a powerful parable about the danger of overlooked details. It reminds us that a castle's true strength was a holistic system, a combination of perfect architecture, impeccable maintenance, and unwavering human vigilance. The mightiest portcullis was useless if the man tasked to drop it was not at his post, and the most cleverly disguised murder hole was irrelevant if the defenders inside had grown lazy and failed to stockpile the rocks and quicklime needed to make it lethal. The entrance was the castle's smile, but it could also be its grimace of pain when its weaknesses were exposed. While the image of medieval warfare often centers on armored knights and stoic men-at-arms, the defense of a castle was never solely their burden. When the siege bell tolled and the enemy gathered at the gates, the very survival of the community depended on a collective effort that mobilized every able body within the walls, regardless of age or gender. Women and children, often entirely overlooked in popular retellings, were integral, active participants in the desperate struggle to hold the entrance the castle's lifeline. Their contributions, though rarely recorded in the grand chronicles of kings, were frequently the difference between a triumphant defense and a tragic fall. Consider the physical reality of operating the castle's defenses. The massive winches that raised the portcullis and drawbridge required immense, coordinated effort. While strong guards might manage it, the sudden chaos of an assault could see every hand pressed into service. Women, accustomed to the hard labor of daily medieval life, were more than capable of joining the teams hauling on these ropes, their combined strength helping to seal the gateway at a critical moment. Meanwhile, children, agile and quick, could be tasked with running messages between the gatehouse and the keep, carrying vital information on enemy movements or fetching essential supplies like replacement arrows or tools for repairs. Their smaller size allowed them to navigate crowded, chaotic passages where a fully armored man would be slow and cumbersome. Then there were the more direct and grim duties. The defense of a castle was a brutal logistics operation, keeping a constant supply of projectiles coming to the archers on the battlements, or ensuring there was enough fuel to heat cauldrons of water or oil, was a continuous task that fell to those not on the front line. Women were often central to this effort, organizing the collection of stones from the courtyard, maintaining the fires, and yes, helping to pour scalding liquids through the murder holes onto the attackers trapped in the passage below. This was not an act of wanton cruelty, but one of stark necessity. In the context of a siege, it was a means of protecting their homes, their families, and their very lives from a foe that showed no mercy. The story of Lady Mary Banks during the English Civil War stands as a powerful testament to this reality. When her husband was away, Lady Bank found herself defending Corfe Castle against a parliamentarian siege not once but twice. She was not a military commander, but she possessed something far more important: unwavering resolve and the loyalty of her garrison and household. She actively directed the defense, and it is recorded that the women of the castle played a key role in repelling the attackers by dropping stones and hot embers from the battlements onto the soldiers attempting to scale the walls. Her leadership and the collective effort of everyone inside held the castle for over 2 years, making her a legendary figure of courageous resistance. Her story, though from a later period, perfectly illustrates the medieval principle that a castle was a unified organism, and its defense was the responsibility of all who sheltered within it. This broader view fundamentally changes our understanding of medieval defense. It moves us away from the simplistic idea of a few professional soldiers holding a wall and toward the more accurate picture of an entire micro-society under pressure, with each person fulfilling a critical role in a life or death operation. The blacksmith's wife might be helping to forge new arrowheads, the baker's children might be collecting stones for the catapults, and the noble lady might be coordinating the distribution of food and water to the guards at the gatehouse. The strength of the entrance was not just measured by the thickness of its wood or the weight of its iron, but by the courage and coordination of the people, men, women, and children who worked together to command its mechanisms and uphold its defiant spirit. It might seem like a leap from the grim, stone gatehouses of the Middle Ages to the sleek, glass-fronted skyscrapers of today, but the DNA of medieval castle defense is woven into the very fabric of modern security architecture. The core principles developed 800 years ago, controlling movement, creating defensible layers, and leveraging psychological dominance, are not obsolete. They have simply been translated into a new language of steel, concrete, and digital surveillance. We no longer build to keep out armies with battering rams, but we absolutely design to control access, deter intrusion, and protect valuable assets, whether they are financial, governmental, or human. The drawbridge has been replaced by the man-traps and security turnstiles, the arrow slit by the high-definition security camera, and the imposing gatehouse by the fortified lobby of a central bank. This is not a coincidence. It is the evolution of a timeless concept of security through intelligent design. consider the journey into a high-security government building or a major data center today. You don't simply walk in through the front door. Your approach is almost certainly channeled, much like the narrow causeway leading to a Barbican. You are funneled toward a specific, heavily monitored entry point. The first layer might be a perimeter fence or a set of robust bollards preventing vehicle ramming attacks, a direct counterpart to the castle's outer wall and ditch. Then you enter the modern equivalent of the Gatehouse Passage, a security checkpoint. This is a controlled choke point where your movement is slowed and your identity is scrutinized. You might pass through a reinforced, bullet-resistant glass door that locks behind you before the next one opens, creating a modern airlock or killing culvert, trapping you between two barriers for assessment. Above you, not murder holes, but pan-tilt zoom cameras record your every move, and security personnel observe from behind one-way glass, their watchful gaze the digital descendant of the guard peering through an arrow loop. The psychological principles at play are strikingly similar. The goal is still to establish a hierarchy of power and control the narrative of the space. The imposing, minimalist facade of a modern embassy or corporate headquarters, often set back from the street and surrounded by open, clear spaces, functions exactly like a wide, water-filled moat. It creates a zone of isolation and observation, making any approach feel exposed and monitored. The use of vast, blank walls or intimidatingly large doors at an entrance isn't just an aesthetic choice. It is a calculated effort to diminish the individual and amplify the institutional power of the organization within, echoing the way a towering Norman keep would loom over an approaching peasant. The message is the same. You are entering a domain of significant power, and your access is a privilege granted under strict terms. This legacy extends beyond obvious fortresses to everyday spaces. The concept of layered access or defense in depth is everywhere. Think about an airport. You start with the outer layer of the terminal doors, then you proceed to the ticket check, then the baggage screening, then the personal identity verification at the security checkpoint, and finally the gate agent before you board the plane. Each layer is a separate filter designed to catch a potential threat early and prevent it from progressing deeper into the system. This is the exact same strategic thinking that led medieval architects to design castles with an outer bailey, an inner bailey, and a final strong keep. A breach in one layer doesn't mean a total failure. It simply means the next layer must hold. The most fascinating evolution is in how we've digitized the role of the gatekeeper. Where a trusted porter once held a massive iron key and knowledge of secret passwords, we now use keycards, biometric scanners, and PIN codes. These are our modern-day secret knocks. But the human element remains crucial. Security guards are no longer knights in armor, but they are trained to observe behavior, to challenge anomalies, and to make split-second decisions about threat levels, embodying the same vigilant spirit as their medieval counterparts stationed in the guardroom. The technology has advanced immeasurably, but the fundamental problem, how to allow the right people in while keeping the wrong people out, hasn't changed in 1,000 years. By studying the ingenious, albeit brutal, solutions of the past, we gain a deeper appreciation for the invisible architecture of security that surrounds us today, proving that the ghosts of the portcullis and the drawbridge still stand guard, silently embedded in the blueprints of our modern world. For centuries, the full story of the castle entrance was locked away, not just behind stone walls, but beneath layers of soil and the assumptions of history. We thought we understood their design from surviving ruins and ancient manuscripts, but the ground itself has been guarding its own secrets, waiting for the right technology and a bit of archaeological luck to reveal the complete, astonishing picture. Recent excavations at castle sites across Europe are fundamentally rewriting the guidebook. proving that these gateways were even more complex and clever than we ever imagined, with hidden features that were literally buried by time. The traditional method of archaeology, careful digging with trowels and brushes, is still invaluable, but it's the advent of non-invasive technology that has truly revolutionized our exploration. Ground-penetrating radar is like gifting historians with X-ray vision. By sending radar pulses into the Earth and measuring the reflected signals, researchers can now map out buried foundations, lost walls, and subterranean tunnels without ever breaking ground. This allows them to create detailed, three-dimensional maps of entire entrance complexes, revealing the ghostly outlines of structures that have been invisible for 500 years. At a site like Old Sarum in England, these surveys have detected the faint but clear imprint of a massive, previously unknown Barbican, and a complex of outworks that completely change our understanding of the castle's approach, showing its initial defenses were far more extensive than the crumbling stone we see today suggests. But when the radar reveals something extraordinary, that's when the meticulous digging begins, and the discoveries are often breathtaking. Excavations around the gatehouse of Caerphilly Castle in Wales unearthed the original, massive timber foundations of a long-rotted drawbridge mechanism, the preserved sockets for the huge pivot points, and the decayed remnants of the mighty oak beams themselves. This physical evidence allowed historians to precisely reconstruct the bridge's size, weight, and pivot mechanism for the first time, moving from artistic guesswork to engineering certainty. In another stunning find at the Château de Quine in Normandy, archaeologists clearing a blocked-up recess in a gatehouse wall discovered a complete, intact portcullis winch mechanism, complete with its wooden windlass and iron chains, left exactly as it was when the castle was abandoned centuries ago. It was a frozen moment in time, a direct tactile link to the defenders who once strained at that very device. Perhaps the most thrilling discoveries are the hidden tunnels and sally ports whose existence was lost even to local legend. At Dunstafnage Castle in Scotland, a routine survey revealed a subtle anomaly in the bedrock. Further excavation uncovered a narrow, expertly concealed passageway leading from the inner courtyard down to the water's edge, its entrance cunningly disguised within the natural rock face. This was no forgotten cellar. It was a planned escape route for the lords of the castle, a secret that had been successfully kept for over 700 years. Similarly, work at the Wartburg Castle in Germany used thermal imaging to identify a slight temperature difference in a section of wall, leading to the discovery of a hidden chamber behind it that may have been used by guards to listen for the sounds of sappers attempting to tunnel beneath the foundations. And it's not just the grand structures that tell the story, it's the small, personal artifacts left behind in the heat of crisis. In the sediment at the bottom of a castle moat in Poland, archaeologists sifting through mud and silt found a trove of objects that had fallen or were thrown from the battlements above during a siege. Among the expected arrowheads and broken masonry were more intimate items: a single rusted key that likely unlocked an inner door, a perfectly preserved leather shoe lost in the mud, and a small wooden toy soldier. These everyday objects paint a profoundly human picture of the chaos and fear that once gripped these now silent stone passages, reminding us that history is not just about kings and conquests, but about the individuals who lived and died defending these gates. Each of these findings, from the grand to the granular, acts like a new piece of a massive, complex puzzle. They force us to continually reassess our assumptions, proving that the medieval mind was even more ingenious in its pursuit of security than we gave it credit for. Every time a new tunnel is mapped or a mechanism is found, it adds another layer of depth to our understanding, revealing that the castle entrance was a living, evolving organism, constantly being adapted and improved. The stones have been whispering their secrets all along, We are only now developing the ears to hear them. We've all seen the dramatic Hollywood portrayal of the castle entrance, a yawning, shark-infested moat, a drawbridge that creaks open to reveal a dark passage leading directly to a slimy, rat-infested dungeon. While these images are thrilling, they often obscure the far more fascinating and pragmatic reality of medieval defensive design. The truth is, popular culture has woven a thick tapestry of myths around these ancient structures, and it's time to pull a few threads to reveal the authentic picture underneath. Let's start with that iconic moat. The idea of a deep, watery chasm teeming with deadly predators is a fantastic cinematic device, but it was a logistical nightmare far beyond the means of most medieval lords. Excavating and maintaining a deep, wide, water-filled ditch required an enormous amount of labor and a reliable, constant water source, which was simply not available at many inland castle sites. Most moats were, in fact, relatively dry. They were steep-sided ditches, often no deeper than a tall man is high, and their primary purpose was not to drown attackers, but to stop them from getting their siege towers and battering rams right up against the wall. A dry moat, often filled with sharpened stakes called chevaux de frise, was a formidable obstacle that broke the momentum of a charge and made undermining the walls incredibly difficult. Even when filled with water, it was usually murky, shallow, and served more to prevent tunneling and reflect the castle's imposing height than to act as an aquatic death trap. Then there's the enduring myth of the dungeon. The word itself instantly conjures images of a deep, dark oubliette where prisoners were forgotten and left to rot. In reality, the term dungeon is a later corruption of the French word donjon, which simply meant the great tower or keep, the strongest part of the castle where the lord lived. The small, dark, underground prison cells we imagine were actually quite rare. Most prisoners of value were held in secured rooms high up in the tower keeps, where they could be better guarded and kept away from potential rescue attempts. The cramped, dark spaces we often mistake for dungeons in castle tours were far more likely to have been used for storage, holding grain, salted meat, or ale. The truly horrific punishment of being thrown into a pit was usually reserved for the most despised captives and was not the standard holding cell. This misconception robs us of understanding the keep's primary role as a secure residence and final redoubt, not a purpose-built prison. The drawbridge itself is shrouded in its own set of exaggerations. We picture a vast, single plank of wood that lowers with a dramatic crash, but most were much more sophisticated and less theatrical. The counterweighted drawbridge was a complex machine, and its operation was slow and deliberate. It wasn't designed to be raised and lowered constantly throughout the day. More importantly, the idea that it led directly to a torture chamber is pure fiction. The gate passage it led to was a busy thoroughfare, the main artery for people, goods, and animals entering and leaving the castle. It was a space of commerce and daily life, not just a prelude to imprisonment. The real genius of the drawbridge was its versatility. It was a barrier, a trap, and a controlled access point, but it was not a dramatic reveal for a villain's lair. Even the classic image of the boiling oil poured through murder holes is ripe for reassessment. Oil was an incredibly valuable commodity in the Middle Ages, used for lighting, cooking, and lubrication. Wasting vast cauldrons of it on attackers would have been an exorbitant expense. Historical accounts and practical experiments suggest that water was the far more common liquid used. Brought to a boil in large cauldrons, water was readily available, much cheaper, and still inflicted horrific, scalding injuries on anyone caught below. In a pinch, defenders would use pitch or tar, which was sticky and flammable, or even quicklime, a caustic powder that could blind and choke. The boiling oil myth, while dramatic, overlooks the medieval mindset of pragmatic efficiency. They used what was effective and available, not what was most cinematic. Dispelling these myths is not about ruining a good story. It's about appreciating the true, layered ingenuity of medieval engineers. Their solutions were born from necessity, resource availability, and a deep understanding of psychology and physics. By moving past the Hollywood cliches, we can see these structures for what they truly were: brilliantly adaptive, multi-functional machines designed for control, deterrence, and survival. The real story of the castle entrance is not one of cartoonish villainy, but of human cleverness in the face of relentless adversity, and that is a narrative far more compelling than any fiction. This incredible diversity in castle entrance design across Europe is a direct reflection of the continent's fragmented political landscape and varied military challenges. A lord in the Welsh marches faced a completely different set of threats than a baron on the Rhine or a knight in the Holy Land, and their gateways tell that story in stone and mortar. By examining these regional styles, we see a fascinating architectural dialogue between local tradition, available resources, and the ever-present need for security, creating a tapestry of defensive design where no two regions built quite the same way. In England, following the Norman conquest, the philosophy was one of overwhelming, concentrated power. English castle builders became the undisputed masters of the gatehouse, developing it into a self-sufficient fortress in its own right. Think of the iconic strongholds like Harlech or Dover. Their entrances are not simple doors but colossal, multi-towered structures that project sheer dominance. The approach is always tightly controlled, often forcing visitors through a series of right-angled turns that break up any charge and eliminate an archer's line of sight. The interior of these English gatehouses are marvels of layered defense, featuring multiple portcullises, murder holes, and spacious guard chambers that could house a large garrison. This design reflects a centralized, powerful monarchy capable of funding such massive construction projects, and a persistent need to subdue a often rebellious local population. The English gatehouse was a statement of permanent, unassailable authority. Cross the Channel into France, and the architectural priorities begin to shift, especially in the later medieval period. While early French castles like the formidable Château Gaillard were purely military machines, the evolution towards the Château introduced a new element: elegance and domestic comfort. The entrance remained defensible, but it also began to serve as a grand stage for the wealth and taste of its owner. The gatehouse might be flanked by elegant, cylindrical towers with beautifully carved masonry, and the space above the gate would feature large, ornate windows that would have been unthinkable in a purely military English design. This wasn't a weakening of defenses but a rebalancing. The Lord was signaling that he was not just a warlord, but a man of culture and refinement, confident enough in his power to incorporate beauty into his stronghold. The entrance became a prelude to the splendors within, a graceful yet still formidable welcome. Journey into the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, and you find a different solution entirely: the German burg seamlessly integrated into a town's fortifications. Here, the castle wasn't always a standalone structure on a hill. It was often the core of a larger defensive network. The castle entrance would frequently connect directly to the town walls, with its gatehouse functioning as the strongest point in the urban perimeter. This design created a symbiotic relationship. The castle provided a final refuge for the townspeople in times of attack, and the town provided the castle with economic sustenance and an outer layer of defense. The threat here was often from rival city-states or internal conflict, requiring a design that linked the fate of the noble family with the security of the entire community. The entrance was a communal asset, a gateway protecting not just a single lord but a whole way of life. Venture further east into Transylvania and the Carpathian Mountains, and you encounter a fascinating fusion of styles born from a crossroads of cultures. Eastern European castles, like the legendary Bran Castle often associated with the Dracula myth, show a unique blend of local architectural traditions with ideas brought back by knights who had fought in the Crusades. You might see the high, sloped stone roofs designed to shed heavy snow right beside crenellated battlements that wouldn't look out of place in the Holy Land. The entrances to these castles are often adapted to their dramatic mountainous settings, with long, winding approach roads that snake up the mountainside, making them easily defensible. Primary threats here were from different directions: the expanding Ottoman Empire to the south and various nomadic groups to the east, leading to a pragmatic, hybrid style that took the best ideas from across Europe and adapted them to a unique and volatile frontier. This regional variety proves there was no single blueprint for the perfect castle entrance. Each design was a brilliant, localized answer to the same fundamental question: how do we keep our people safe while proclaiming our power to the world? The stone still standing today whispers the answer in a dozen different architectural languages. Now, let's shift our perspective from stone and strategy to silver and coin, because behind every towering gatehouse and iron portcullis was a mountain of economic calculation. Constructing these elaborate entrance systems was arguably the single most expensive part of building a castle, a massive financial undertaking that only the wealthiest lords could afford. It wasn't just about piling up rocks, it was about hiring the most skilled stonemasons from distant cities, purchasing vast quantities of high-quality iron for portcullis bars and gate hinges, and funding the intricate woodworking for drawbridges and winches that required the expertise of master carpenters. This wasn't a simple construction project, it was a long-term investment in security, and the bill was staggering. Consider the specialized labor involved. A simple laborer might earn a penny a day, but a master mason or a blacksmith capable of forging a massive portcullis could command many times that amount. These experts were the medieval equivalent of high-tech engineers, and they knew their worth. The ironwork alone was a huge expense. Producing enough wrought iron for a single large portcullis required tons of ore, vast quantities of charcoal for the forge, and weeks of labor from a team of blacksmiths. Then this incredibly valuable iron had to be transported, often over terrible roads, to the building site. The cost was so prohibitive that some smaller castles made do with wooden portcullises sheathed in only thin strips of iron, a compromise between security and budget. But the financial burden didn't end once the last stone was laid. A castle entrance was a high-maintenance asset. The wooden drawbridge, constantly exposed to the elements, needed regular treatment with tar to prevent rot. The complex system of ropes, pulleys, and winches needed constant inspection and lubrication. The ironwork had to be checked for rust and repaired. This required a permanent staff of skilled retainers, carpenters, blacksmiths, and engineers whose wages, food, and lodging were a continuous drain on the lord's treasury. Neglecting this upkeep was a dangerous false economy. A rusty chain snapping during an attack or a rotten drawbridge collapsing under its own weight could lead to the loss of the entire castle. Then there was the ongoing cost of the garrison itself. A magnificent gatehouse was useless without trained, vigilant men to operate it. These soldiers, the gatekeepers and archers, required regular pay, weapons, armor, and daily rations. Stockpiling supplies for a potential siege was another enormous expense. A castle needed to store months' worth of grain, salted meat, and ale to withstand a prolonged blockade. It also needed vast reserves of less obvious but equally critical materials, arrows by the thousands, stones of the right size and shape to be dropped from murder holes, and cauldrons for heating water or oil. This was not a passive structure. It was a living, consuming entity that demanded a constant flow of resources to maintain its defensive readiness. This immense financial outlay explains why the most impressive gatehouses are found on castles built by kings or the very highest echelon of the nobility. Only they had the vast, sustained income from taxes, land rents, and feudal dues to afford such projects. For a lesser lord, building a simpler gate was a strategic necessity, but building a grandiose one could be a risky display of ambition that might actually bankrupt his estate. The entrance, therefore, was not just a symbol of military power, but also of immense economic power. Its sheer scale and complexity were a blatant announcement that the owner possessed not only the will to defend his domain, but also the deep pockets required to make that defense truly impregnable. Yet even the most brilliantly designed entrance was utterly helpless against an enemy that never slept and never retreated, the relentless, unforgiving force of nature itself. Medieval castle builders didn't just have to outthink human adversaries, they had to outmaneuver the seasons, the weather, and the very ground upon which their fortresses stood. A gatehouse that could repel 1,000 men might be brought low by a single, unusually harsh winter, proving that the environment was a silent, ever-present foe that demanded constant respect and adaptation. Water, the very element that filled protective moats, was also a primary agent of decay and destruction. A period of heavy, prolonged rain could transform the approach to a castle into a treacherous quagmire, bogging down supply carts and making it difficult for defenders to sortie out. More dangerously, this saturation threatened the castle's very foundations. Water seeping into the mortar between stones could freeze during a cold night, and as water expands when it turns to ice, this created immense pressure from within the wall itself. Over time, this endless cycle of freezing and thawing could crack even the most massive blocks of stone, creating weaknesses that a savvy besieger might later exploit with a battering ram. To combat this, masons often used the hardest, most durable stone for the lower courses of the gatehouse and sloped the ground away from the walls to encourage drainage, but it was a perpetual battle against the elements. The moat itself was a system in constant flux with the seasons. A water-filled moat in the summer, shimmering and impressive, could become a major liability in a deep freeze. A sufficiently thick layer of ice transformed that protective barrier into a smooth highway, allowing attacking forces to simply walk across and set their ladders directly against the walls, bypassing the drawbridge entirely. Defenders had to be vigilant, often tasked with regularly breaking up the ice near the walls to maintain a frigid, open channel of water. Conversely, a dry moat in a wet climate could turn into a muddy, overflowing stream during a spring thaw, its sides eroding and its bottom becoming a slippery trap that could undermine the stability of the gatehouse walls themselves. The organic components of the entrance were particularly vulnerable. The huge timbers of the drawbridge and the massive winches that operated it were susceptible to rot in damp, poorly ventilated spaces. A long, wet autumn could leave the wood spongy and weak, compromising its structural integrity. To prevent this, castle builders designed their gatehouses with careful attention to airflow, creating vents and openings that allowed moisture to escape and kept the crucial mechanical parts dry. The ironwork of the portcullis and gate hinges was another target for the elements, relentlessly attacked by rust. The garrison's blacksmith was a vital member of the defense team, his forge constantly active with the work of cleaning, oiling, and repairing the metal components that were the muscles of the entrance. In response to these challenges, medieval engineers devised some remarkably clever adaptations. There is evidence to suggest that some castles in particularly cold climates experimented with heated gatehouses. While not central heating as we know it, clever design could channel smoke from fireplaces through flues within the walls of the gate passage, gently warming the stone just enough to prevent the accumulation of ice on the steps and to keep the portcullis mechanisms from freezing solid. Other castles built near rivers featured sophisticated water control systems, networks of sluice gates and canals that allowed the garrison to actively manage the water level in their moats. They could lower it in the winter to prevent freezing or raise it dramatically during a siege to flood the approaches against an attacking army, turning the landscape itself into a weapon. This ability to work with their environment, to harness and control natural forces rather than just resist them, stands as a powerful testament to the pragmatic ingenuity of the medieval mind, forever balancing the demands of security against the immutable laws of nature. So as we lower the drawbridge on our exploration, it's clear that these castle entrances were far more than just doors in a wall. They were the brilliant, beating heart of medieval defensive strategy, a perfect symphony of stone, iron, and human ingenuity. Every element, from the imposing bulk of the gatehouse to the hidden mechanics of the portcullis, was meticulously designed to serve a dual purpose: to physically bar entry and to psychologically dominate anyone who dared to approach. They were fortresses of the mind as much as fortresses of stone, using fear, confusion, and awe as their first and most effective line of defense. The legacy of this medieval mindset is all around us, woven into the very fabric of how we think about security and architecture today. The next time you walk through a secured building, passing through a series of doors, a metal detector, and a watchful security desk, you are essentially walking through a modern, digitized gatehouse. The principles are identical: controlled access, layered checkpoints, and constant surveillance. The drawbridge has been replaced by the mantraps, the murder holes by security cameras, and the loyal gatekeeper by a biometric scanner, but the core idea remains. We still build to control movement, to create defensible space, and to establish a clear message of authority and security. This journey through history's hidden corners reveals a timeless truth about human nature. Our need for safety, our desire to protect what is ours, and our incredible capacity for innovation in the face of threat are constants that transcend centuries. The medieval castle builders, with their limited technology but boundless cleverness, crafted solutions that were both brutally effective and astonishingly sophisticated. They teach us that true security is not just about building thicker walls, but about thinking smarter, anticipating the moves of your adversary, and understanding the profound power of psychology. Their story is a powerful reminder that innovation is often born from necessity, and that some of the most enduring ideas have very deep, very old roots. So the next time you see a castle, whether in person or in a film, look beyond the fairy tale and see the incredible machine. See the layers of defense, the clever traps, and the silent, stoic stones that have stood guard for centuries. They have countless stories left to tell, and we have only just begun to listen. Thank you for joining me on this adventure into the past. If you enjoyed uncovering these secrets, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next journey into history.